welcome everyone to this event of the Eden Black Alumni Association hosting conversations throughout this month of February, culminating with a worship experience this time next week, Friday at 11:30, where the Reverend Dr. Earl Fisher will be the preacher of the day. And so thank you for joining today, and hoping to see a lot of folks back next week. My name is Mary Schaller Blaufuss. I serve as the Vice President for Advancement at Eden Theological Seminary, and I am very pleased to welcome you to this space and turn this official welcome over to President Deb Krause.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's wonderful to be here with you all this morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm here in the president's office, which has recently been refurbished a bit, and you can see my empty, mostly bookshelves behind me. So it's an exciting time for me here to be settling into this space, and I welcome you all here. Welcome to this forum in our series of Eden Black alumni events honoring Black History Month and thinking together about theological education, ministry, and the moment in which we find ourselves. In the New York Times this morning, I was struck by a wonderful, compelling story of an art show, an exhibition in New York City that Black artists have pulled together in the city, framing our time and the art show in general as one really framed by the ideas of Black grief and white grievance. And I was thinking how powerfully that connects to our subject matter today, how we are gathered here as we consider the Capitol coup insurrection and the resources we have in theological reflection to help us think deeply about our calling in this time of Black grief and white grievance. In this time, we pray for God's Spirit to be with us in conversation and for God's wisdom to guide us. Today, we are mindful of the gifts of the Eden Black alumni for their vocations, their ministries of social justice and transformation, and for their faithfulness. And we give thanks for our exemplars along the way, such as the Reverend Dr. Enoch Hammond Oglesby, who has challenged us for decades as a theological thinker and ethicist, a professor, a minister in the community, a preacher and teacher, and most recently, who has inspired us with his generosity in his $5,000 challenge to support the scholarship in his name, the Oglesby Scholarship, in support of future Eden Black alumni in their theological educations. Gracious God, we lift all of this up to you with hearts full of gratitude for your providence and grace. Amen.
Well, welcome, friends, to this morning's panel conversation. My name is Ben Sanders. It is my pleasure to be here with you all. I'm an assistant professor of theology and ethics at Eden Theological Seminary, where I've been working now for about 5.5 years. And one of the things that has truly enriched my time working as a teacher, as a scholar, and being a community member in the greater STL region has been the relationships that I've built with Eden's Black alum and the students that I have been blessed to learn from and to teach in my time here at the seminary. I see some of y'all in the group chat. It's good to see y'all as always. Some of y'all I haven't seen in way too long because of COVID and just busy schedules. It's always a blessing to see you all. This morning, as President Krause has already sort of prepared the way for us, we're going to be thinking together with some representatives of Eden's Black Alumni Association about our callings to leadership, about our callings to transformation, and about our callings to continue to keep our hands to the plow of justice and equity. And we're going to be thinking about it specifically in light of the violent riot that we saw at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. It should be impossible for us to separate the riot that we saw on January 6th from events that have preceded it in our immediate history as a country. I think of the violent outbreak we saw in Charlottesville and so many other explicit examples of white supremacy's persistence in our society. I am thrilled today to be joined by 3 alums of Eden Theological Seminary whose expertise, whose commitment, whose ongoing work is a wonderful reflection both of Eden's legacy and I think of the work that we are called to do in this particular moment. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce our panelists this morning. Our first panelist is Mr. DeMarco K. Davidson. As many of you know, DeMarco is a recognized community leader in Greater STL. He is a graduate of Hazelwood Central High School. He earned a BS in engineering management with minors in chemistry and psychology in 2006. He got that from the University of Missouri at Rolla. And we at Eden Seminary were lucky to have DeMarco here as a student, and he earned his Master of Divinity from Eden in 2018. The list of the ways that DeMarco has been and remains involved in helping to transform the region in which we live is long. And so I will name just a couple of them. DeMarco is active in the Kappa League, which is an organization committed to helping African-American youth in particular to be shaped by the organization Kappa Alpha Psi, his fraternity. DeMarco is a staff member of Metropolitan Congregations United, where he is doing an amazing job of leading courageous conversations that have the capacity and potential to transform some of the issues here in our region. And of course, DeMarco took on the call of running for Congress when the prospects for transformative leadership looked dire. I am so excited to hear from my brother and my friend, DeMarco Davidson, this morning. DeMarco, welcome, and thank you for taking out some time to be here with us this morning, my brother.
Thank you. It's an honor, and I love you all.
Our next panelist is Reverend Nelson Jerome Pierce. He is the senior pastor of Beloved Community Church. He works as the grassroots power builder for democracy in America. Reverend Pierce has also worked to strengthen the justice ministries of churches all around the country. He's led workshops. He's participated in national conventions to equip pastors and churches with tools to address issues of sex and sexuality in a theologically grounded and holistic way. And he has helped to organize clergy to resist stand your ground legislation and to end the tyranny of police brutality. Reverend Pierce is, of course, also a proud graduate of Eden Theological Seminary. Reverend Pierce, thank you so much for making time to be with us this morning. My brother, if this wasn't included in your bio, what year did you graduate from Eden? Would you share that with us?
I graduated from Eden in 2008.
Okay, now. That's the same year I graduated from seminary.
Yes,
Let's
sir.
get it then.
It was a good year.
Yes, it was. Welcome, brother. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And last, but certainly not least, it is my pleasure to welcome my sister, an esteemed local faith leader, the Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould. She is a 2010 graduate of Eden Seminary. She's a native of Demopolis, Alabama, which is 45 miles west of Selma, where her mother fought for voter rights. She currently serves as executive director of Missouri Faith Voices, which is a statewide multi-faith grassroots organization. In the 2018 election cycle, Missouri Faith Voices led the second largest voter engagement campaign in the state of Missouri by focusing on Black voters. In addition to this amazing work, Reverend Dr. Gould answered the call to the front line in Ferguson, and since that time, her voice and witness has taken her all around the world, from Palestine to Ghana. We were together in Ghana, and from the Carter Center to the White House. She's a founding member of Faith for Justice Lending, a national ecumenical coalition that fights against predatory lending. Dr. Gould describes her call as being located in the public square at the intersections of faith, politics, community, and justice. In the fall of 2019, she left the pulpit to focus on ministry in the public square, and we are blessed to have her with us this morning. Thank you so much, my dear sister, the Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, for being with us.
Good morning. It's my pleasure indeed.
So we are here this morning, thanks be to God, and we are here to reflect on what it means to be committed to progressive transformation, to be committed to race equity, to be committed to transforming the city and region in which we live in light of the violent riot that we saw take place at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, where thousands descended on our nation's capital with false and unfounded accusations of an election having been stolen, all under the long-lasting guise of taking a country back and making it great again by excluding many and reinforcing the vicious and deadly grasp of white supremacy. I am thrilled this morning to have 3 members of the Eden Black Alumni Association who have been thoroughly and deeply committed to transforming some of the issues that we saw on display on those Capitol steps here in our region. And so to get us started this morning, y'all, I would like to begin with this, our first question, and just as a way to find a way into what I know is going to be a rich conversation. And if it's okay, Reverend Dr. Gould, I'd like to begin with you. I got your bio last, so I'll come to you first with our opening question. And I'd like for you to just think about us, think out loud with us on this question. As leaders of the Black church and Black community, what are your initial thoughts on lessons or wisdom that the Capitol riot either teaches or reaffirms for Black folk who are seeking equity and justice, particularly in this part of the country?
Yeah, particularly in this part of the country, home of Dred Scott, Ferguson, and so much more. My thoughts are that it certainly affirmed for those of us who have been in the face of law enforcement officers protesting righteously and fearing for our lives. It affirmed that our humanity, when compared to the humanity of white, vile, evil, racist rioters, terrorists, domestic terrorists is actually what they were, means nothing. It affirms that, particularly from my lens as a proud product and a proponent of the Black church, it affirms that we also are called in this moment to continue to lead the church in general in disentangling ourselves from white supremacy that is often cloaked under the veneer of Christianity. When I saw the riots, my whole body had a reaction.
Dr. Gould, we seem to have lost your audio, hopefully just momentarily.
I'm out there on the streets. I just come from doing a panel somewhere or a speech or whatever. I was mad at the people who I was doing the speech for because they weren't out in the streets. So I don't even know what I said that night. But I get there, you know, I got all my Black girl magic working, hair done. You know, I got on heels because we weren't going out that night. But then they said tanks were out. So I got my little stole on and I'm thinking that I can mediate. The same expletives that the law enforcement officers used on young folk in the street, they used on me when I was trying to negotiate, trying to get a young person to their car. And so it just affirmed everything that I've always known, but that was even more affirmed during the time of Ferguson. And it affirmed the fact that the church really has to make a difference, and we have to say something about this.
Yes.
Lives are depending on it.
Dr. Gould, we lost your audio just for a little bit. No. You're fine. I just want to allow you to give a little bit of context to that story that you were just telling. I believe that's a story from your time being involved in Ferguson, around Ferguson.
Yeah. So
we lost your audio. Yeah. Would you give us that context?
Yeah. August the 15th. So Mike Brown dies on August the 9th. And if I can be real honest, which is the only way I know how to be, right? It wasn't so much that, we've heard the stories. Young people called the church to the streets. For us, we had really, I'm using my I voice. I was amongst those who had honestly, sadly normalized tanks in the middle of a street, West Florissant. And if I can further contextualize that, for me, Ferguson is the place, that very complex. My now deceased former mother-in-law lived in that complex. She ran a department for the federal government. It's a market rate complex that my children played in. And so I had a special something going on inside of me when all of that happened. Well, on the night of the 15th, to see that those tanks were in those streets, in streets that I've literally walked around that corner to, let me know that as a Black person in America, and especially in Missouri, that forget my soul, right? Because the church always wants to talk about souls. My life was not safe. My body was not safe. It reaffirmed that which I had always known. And it just brought it really home for me. And that particular night was a night that I will never forget. Young people crying out, saying, I might as well just walk into the tanks because they're going to kill us anyway. If I don't die tonight, I'll die soon.
Dr. Gould, thank you so much for sharing. It's not you, it's your audio. We lost you just for a little bit, but we got you back and we heard the most important parts of that account. So thank you so much for sharing. I want to, before we pivot to the next in our set of questions for this morning, I want to invite you, Reverend Pierce, to sort of tag in and speak a little bit on this. Anyone who has had my classes knows that one of the things that I like to do as a product of the Black church, as one who loves the Black church, is particularly when we're in the safe space of the seminary classroom, to think critically about this institution that we love. Some of what I heard in Reverend Gould's response to our first question had to do with the role or absence, depending on your perspective, of the Black church in the Ferguson uprising. And because the Ferguson uprising plays such a critical role in shaping the consciousness of folks who live in this area, and should therefore play a role in shaping how we see what happened and how we view and interpret what happened on the steps of the Capitol on January 6th. I wonder if you might speak a little bit from your own perspective as one who is a senior pastor about the role of the church and specifically the role of the Black church. You might reflect on what you saw after Ferguson. You might reflect on where the Black church is and what challenges it is facing in this moment. What might you pick up from there, Reverend Pierce?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Sanders, for the question. The first thing I would say is what we witnessed on the Capitol on January 6th should be an affirmation of the message of the Black church in the space of protest, in the work of social justice, in all of the movement building work that we have believed and we have preached and practiced that how we build must be consistent with what we wish to build. And so we have tried to build a revolution based on love. We have tried to build a movement based on truth. We have tried to build a new world based on principles of nonviolence. And And those seeds that we've planted, and when we've done it right, the ways that we have built it have all gone to try to establish practices that that reinforce the destination that we are trying to get to, so that we can create spaces where we can have places of heaven on earth, even as we are moving towards this place. And what we saw on the Capitol in January 6th was a movement that had been built on lies, a movement that had been built on white violence, a movement that had been built on terror, now beginning to eat itself. That movement was no longer just limited to terrorizing Black people, people of color, Catholics, LGBTQ plus people, others who were considered on the outside of the periphery of society looking in, who could be victimized without consequence. Now it went to the nation's capital because it sees the nation itself as being tied up with all of these, and it sees itself as being moved to the margins. And so now it is coming to attack and to try to claim its space again in the heart of the nation. And what we have seen in the aftermath of that is what happens when we have no accountability.
Yes.
One of the principles that the church has tried to instill is that we must be accountable for our actions.
Yes.
And that even that repentance and forgiveness are not ways of bypassing accountability, but actually ways of making sure that accountability brings people back into the community and doesn't expel them unnecessarily. But when there is no repentance and there is no accountability, we have people whose job it was to protect the Capitol, who lost their lives, who were beaten to death by this mob, and nobody is being held accountable. Not one of the members of the House of Representatives or the senators, including one of the senators from your great state in Missouri, who stood up even after the violence to back the lies that have been told about the election and to justify the actions of those who attacked the Capitol. None of them have been held accountable. And the president who stoked this avoided accountability because people are too afraid of losing their jobs to stand up for what is right. And when some of the people did, we saw the senator from Pennsylvania who did vote to convict the president. And the Republican Party from Pennsylvania said publicly, we did not send you up there to vote your conscience. We did not send you up there to do what was right. We sent you up there to speak and act and defend the party. And so this level of violence, this deep idolatrous situation where white supremacy is being elevated above party, above the good of the nation, where white supremacy is being elevated above religious belief. We are in this place of deep idolatry, and we have to have a place of accountability so that there can be true repentance.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for that powerful word. I think so much of what you said about the idolatry of whiteness, about the sort of self-referential nature of truth when it is in the possession of whiteness, right? The ways in which this movement is sort of turning in on and beginning to consume itself is something that is just so hard to miss. And when we look with a critical perspective at the events that happened at the Capitol on January 6th. Reverend Pierce, we'll be back to you in 1 second. I want to turn now to you, DeMarco, and I want to ask you, one, to sort of pick up on what we've been talking about, which is to sort of just share some of your initial thoughts on lessons or wisdom or things that you learned or maybe perspectives that you already held that were affirmed as you look back at the riot on January 6th. You might also speak a little bit about what you take some of the role of the Black church to be in this moment.
Yeah. So again, thank you, and it's truly an honor, and I'm just over excited from seeing all of the faces and the people who have nurtured me as well. It's incredible. You know, I want to correct. I mean, encourage us to correct one thing. Encourage, and that is like, stop calling this a riot. If riot is supposed to be the language of the unheard, then like these would be people. These would be citizens who have not been heard. But as we continue to see who actually it comes out, like these are former military or former police or even active duty police, active elected officials were involved in the coup. It's a coup. A coup is a violent takeover of government. And that's what that was. Coup comes from the French word blow. Blow means to hit, to strike. That's what that was. There was a strike and a blow towards democracy. A strike and blow towards all of the progress that America has continued to work towards, not just in the past since 2014, but from before probably any of us were even born. When we look at everything from, you know, and I truly appreciate, one of my favorite classes was the Black Social Gospel that Reverend Dr. Ben Sanders taught. When we look at the progress, every time there's been a form of progress, there's always a form of repercussion, another blow, a counter blow, and that's what I saw. I wrote a reflection during the summer of last year from the Reverend Dr. James Cone's book, Malcolm Martin in America, and he talked about how integrationists, not necessarily nationalists, but integrationists understood that one of the things they would attempt to do was not wake up the inherent genocidal nature of white racism. Like that's one thing that integrationists try to do. They didn't want to wake up that inherent genocidal nature. And that's where, to me, the revolution, not revolution, I'll get to that later, the revelation of recognizing that when it comes to Black people in America, Black Americans, we have known, and sometimes it is an inconvenient, unsettling truth, is that no one is coming here to save us. And as Reverend Pierce just shared, Reverend Nelson just shared, that it's self-evident now. It's self-evident, and we've already known that white racist America can get away with genocide, and no one is coming to hold them accountable. There will be no accountability on America. Yes, we all know about the hypocrisy that America continues to do and continue to see. You know, the N in NASA does not stand for Negro. Like there will be no space program for saving our Black butts, right? So when I think of like, what does the Black church, like specifically, right? Or even just, let's just say church, because that's a whole nother conversation in a second, because this was fueled by the hyper evangelical right wing of church that really valued control and controlling not just a narrative, but really controlling the money and the finances and the power that churches were able to massively build over centuries, again, because of the beginning of how this country was formed. So when I saw the coup, and a failed coup at that, I also want to bring it up real fast. It was a failed coup, one, because they had piss poor leadership. And this is actually what concerns me. That is that if they actually did have a for real leader who would have said, we going to the Capitol to show our strength and I'm gonna be with you, and then he actually start walking in front of them, we'll be having a completely different topic or discussion right now, because that would have been a more successful coup. But he went and hid somewhere. I'm concerned about and this is what we've learned from history. And this is also why I was saying before he even got elected, this is what reminds me of Germany after World War I. They were looking for somebody to rise up and acknowledge the pain and suffering that the Germans were dealing with. They used, unfortunately, scapegoat tactics to blame Jews and blame other people for their issues. And then there was a leader who said, oh, I'll be your narcissistic leader, no problem. I'm concerned about this massive group of people now who've seen failed leadership, but are still angry and upset and looking for the next person to give them pride and being and scapegoat and all those different things. That's what I'm concerned about when it comes to that concept of because there will be some people who say, I was one of the people, and this will also concern me. When we see all different people, whether it's the Buffalo Bill dude or whatever, or anybody else, right? They can say, oh, I was there, I got arrested, and he didn't acquit us. That gives them more clout. And again, this is why I'm concerned about, that's why I call it a coup or a failed coup, because to them, some of them thought that this was successful. Some of them showed how weak America really is, how much of a hypocrite America is. And then people in the rest of the world is also watching how people are not being held accountable. The Buffalo Bill guy has certain diet needs. Now he gets a better diet than most kids in schools. So it's just things like that that continue to alarm me and let me know that America has not learned. America has not learned their lesson. At the same time, though, I am encouraged and excited about so many people who also are able to articulate what we actually are dealing with and calling it out, naming, like very similar to when Jesus or anybody else was exorcised a demon, calling that demon by its name. And that is white supremacy. And I do believe part of my hope comes from the fact that more white people are waking up and recognizing that white supremacy don't benefit us either. When they start recognizing that racism don't work, racism keeps them down and keeps them at a lower place in life, that also begins to create a more of a mass conscientization, as Reverend Bosak would say, from South Africa. So that's one thing that I'm starting to see, which excites me. And I'm also hoping and praying that the Black congregations, and I'll share this, and this is one reason why I brought up the whole concept of NASA in the first place, right? When we think about environmental justice or environmental racism, when I think about that, yes, I automatically think of like food deserts and school prison pipeline, things of that nature. And I also think about how many Black pastors in St. Louis City, St. Louis County are really struggling to want to keep their doors open, but then also constantly providing services for communities that are extremely hurting. And it's going to be real challenging to provide food and soup kitchens and all those different things when our planet is on fire. And I don't say that facetiously. I don't say that just to be shocking. America has a fire season now. A fire season. Like that's crazy. Our planet is on fire. Where we gonna go? Like, so it's troubling. It's challenging for a local community Black pastor or even a pastor in period, to even in the rural area, to work on and continue to develop the soul of a congregation, while also all these different things are happening as well. So that's why I hope for to where we can continue to work together to figure out how to heal the soul, to also heal the planet as well.
Powerful. That is powerful, DeMarco. Thank you so much. Your words remind me of the wisdom of Howard Thurman, who taught us that no matter how we justify it, if we give into the practice of hatred as a natural way of being, we will inevitably give into a way of life that consumes us. And some of, as Reverend Pierce has already said, some of that we witnessed on the steps of the Capitol. Some of what we witnessed is a product of what happens when you give yourself to hating as a way of being. I want to move now to a second question and press a little bit more specifically into insights for Christians and progressive leaders. And for this, I want to circle back to Dr. Gould and bring her back into the conversation. I wonder, Dr. Gould, what insights should Christians and progressive leaders of all races and ethnicities be taking from what we saw on January 6th? If I am tasked in this moment with pastoring a church or leading an organization that is about specific issues, whether that be the school to prison pipeline or that be voter registration and resisting voter suppression, whatever the kind of issue is, whether that be environmental issues and the degradation of our planet, I wonder what insights should Christians and progressive leaders be gleaning from the Capitol attack?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm apologizing. I hope you all can hear me.
Your audio's great.
Okay, good. Let's pray that it stays that way. So I think there are many lessons. I like most people in the movement who are people of faith rely on some of the wisdom of those who have gone before us. I'm mindful of the letter from the Birmingham jail. And in that letter, you know, Dr. King, it's a rebuttal, but he's also calling out, and in some ways calling in those who would have been those white evangelicals who would have their theology, would have even supported that which we saw on January the 6th. The lesson, basic lesson from the church is that our silence is complicit. Basic lessons for the church. Dr. Sanders, you and I were together in my first trip to Ghana, and seeing the church sitting on top of the cells of the dungeons that enslaved our ancestors. And so that was not just about architecture, that was literally about the foundation of white Christianity as we know it in America. Mm-hmm. And so even in our most liberal places of faith, we should honestly own and examine the role of racism and white nationalism and how we have entangled ourselves with that. So one of the lessons has to be that in this season, it is beyond time to begin the process of disentangling ourselves from that.
Wow.
It is a matter of literally not just re-examining our theology, not just reading a book and having these book studies by Black authors, book studies about anti-racist practices. That is really perfunctory. It is really a matter of dismantling our own embedded theological, not just theology, but our theological practices. Yes. It is about bringing a racial equity lens inside the church, first of all. It is about how in the church we are actually positioning ourselves and repenting.
Yes.
Repenting and engaging in reparations. I believe that reparations actually has to start with the church, particularly the Christian church. We are not there yet. And we continue to allow those who would dare to say that they were Christians to wave flags that might have the letters JESUS on them, but they are not to the idol of white supremacy. And to Reverend Nelson's point, it is indeed idolatry. And so how long will those of us who claim that we know better, those of us who engage in the rhetoric of liberation, how long will we allow that to symbolize who the church is?
Yes. Yes. Wow. That is profound. Dr. Gould, I can't help but recall I'm teaching this semester at Eden a course to our DMin students called Black Theology as a Resource for Leadership Development. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in that course is make much more explicit than I can sometimes do in MDiv courses, that one of the things inside of the Black theological tradition is a real compelling invitation, if we know how to read it, to fundamentally transform what leadership looks like, including religious leadership, including pastoral leadership. I think that as the enrollment, as the size of mainline Protestant churches continue to decline, as seminaries continue to wonder what the future of theological education will look like, we are far past time to do the work that you are inviting us to, of fundamentally rethinking the theology that undergirds our churches. Reverend Pierce, I want to turn back to you. I wonder if you heard anything in what Dr. Gould was just reflecting on that makes you want to speak on some of your work as a pastor, right? I hear in Dr. Gould's comments and in much of my own teaching, regular and I think needed challenges to those of us that that are entrusted with pastoring our people. So I wonder, from where you sit, what kind of challenges are you maybe embracing, deepening your commitment to, rethinking as a pastor and leader?
Yeah. So amen to everything that Dr. Gould said. From my position as a pastor, what I am realizing is that my role as a pastor as a pastor of a progressive church is to help the progressive church movement broadly, and my church in specific, to take on the attitude of the Apostle Paul in terms of becoming all things to all people. One of the challenges, I think, that the progressive church is encountering in this moment is that we have not done as good of a job as we should have about how we tell our stories and tell them in ways that resonate with people. The part of it, I think, is there has been too much arrogance in the progressive movement in general, which has spilled into and maybe flowed through the progressive church specifically. We have assumed that because we are educated and because we seek to be correct or better or improving in our doctrine, in our stances, that people will be attracted to us because of our rightness and because of our righteousness, and that all we have to do is just be right and people will come to us. And maybe that was the case in the 1960s and 70s for many churches, but it's certainly not the case now. And so we have to change up how we approach what we are doing and tell our stories in ways that draw in people, particularly the people who are considered the least of these, who are left out and who have been left behind, that these are the places where the church needs to be present. And so where you are, where your church is located, it might look different. It looks different for me as a Black pastor in a largely Black city in Cincinnati than it will for a white pastor in a rural area in Ohio or Missouri or Tennessee or Kentucky, than it would for a pastor of a multi-ethnic church in a major city. Each of what we do based on our context looks differently, but what ought to be the same is our allegiance and our willingness to do what Jesus did, which is to always find ourselves with the least of these in our society, and letting go of our academic arrogance that makes us far too often appear as if we are the Pharisees in the biblical text rather than being followers of Christ in the biblical text.
Yes. Wow. That is so powerful. That is so powerful. Thank you so much. DeMarco, I wonder from where you sit in the organizing work that you're doing, we've touched on language. We've touched on the need to retell stories. I think that all of this is some of the critical work that we are allowed to do on a regular basis in theological education. We're regularly toying with the language that we use to tell our stories so that we can call a coup what it is, so that we can tell the story of the church as it needs to be told. As you sit in this moment and you think about wisdom to be gleaned, and you can think about this from the local work that you're doing here in the region, or you can think about it as sort of this moment of sort of organizing nationally in the United States. What are some sort of key insights? You've spoken a little bit on this, but would you say a little bit more about key insights as you reflect on the six and the work that you're doing locally? What does it look like for us to follow Jesus and faithfully in this moment in our work and our leadership?
Yeah, so excellent question, and definitely thank you, Reverend Dr. Gould and Pastor Nelson as well for those amazing and powerful insights too. I didn't add this in my bio, I probably need to, but I actually do serve as the president of the consistory at St. John's UCC, the beloved community on the corner of Grand and Lee on the north side of St. Louis, where Reverend Michelle Higgins is the pastor. One, of course, having a dynamic pastor like that, and also formerly Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson as well, is just incredible. One of the great things that helped me, but also agitated me with not just Reverend Wilson and even professors like Professor Dr. Krause as well, is when we are talking about, when we speak about the Bible or when we read the Bible, to really question and to agitate the stories, right? So, for example, I'm thinking of, the question is, those who are followers of Jesus. I love the concept of being followers of Jesus, followers of the way, followers of Christ, and I have no qualms with that. One story that's jumped out to me right at this very moment is from Matthew 15, when the unnamed Canaanite woman with the demon-possessed daughter actually changed Jesus' ministry. Yes. Jesus was all about, nope, I'm focusing just on Israel. I'm focusing just on them. I can't rock with anybody else. That was, and you all can read the chapter, y'all probably know it already. And long story short, it changed Jesus' trajectory on his mission, on his journey, literally was able to have compassion for thousands of people after that in that story. So when I think of, yes, we can be followers of Jesus, but we can also be the people who change Jesus for people, for the change the ministry, how people recognize and reflect on Jesus, who Jesus is or was, and even check people's Jesus. I know it's kind of crazy, but like, especially we seminarians, like literally when people say certain things to me, I'm like, wow, that's an interesting perspective. How you come up with that? Like, I don't challenge them, like, because I went to Eden, so they don't have a chance, right? But more importantly, we have to make sure that who is Jesus to them? Like some people. So when it comes to progressive leadership, I truly always hold this up. Reverend Dr. Tracy Blackman, another Eden alum, shared this during Ferguson October in front of thousands of people. She said that we've mistaken access for ownership. We've mistaken access for ownership. Just because they allow us to come and talk about Jesus don't mean they actually listening. Just because we was able to get some good jobs and work at a manufacturing plant and be part of America's economy, don't mean we actually own anything or own any industries that really do control quite a bit of how America works. So I think it's important that we share and reflect that Jesus, yes, Jesus was a somebody who did undo oppressive systems. At the same time, and again, I'm excited about that, but recognizing that somebody had to influence Jesus to see their humanity. So I think it's important for us as progressive leaders, especially, and I'm thinking also about what Pastor Nelson said, how sometimes we get so caught up on doing right or being progressively right or correct in that moment, or even being woke, being conscious. And I recognize that with all of that good doing, right? It's important to me that we recognize, again, as I shared earlier, which each time we have some type of progression, there's going to be some repercussions that come along with that. But then how to be prepared for that. Yes. One of the best things that I experienced in Reverend Sanders' class is that he actually challenged us one time. He's like, what came first, the March on Washington or the Birmingham church bombing? And it was the March on Washington with the I Have a Dream and all that great stuff. But then they had a huge nightmare in Birmingham. And
just weeks later.
So if we are going to really, and if we look at the actual, going back to the original question, being a follower of Jesus, they'll probably go get your ass killed. Being a follower of Jesus.
Yes.
Doing what Jesus was doing to unroot the systems of oppression is probably going to lead you to an earlier demise. To me, if we're talking about being progressive, we're talking about also being potent and powerful, and recognizing that, that Jesus was killed by the state. Yes. Jesus wasn't killed by a bunch of rebel rousers. He wasn't just killed by, it wasn't a Nazarene or Nazarene crime. Like, he was killed by the state.
Yes.
Like, so we recognize that we are going up against these powers. To me, that encourages me and inspires me to not just get out there and just be and do something, or even be just seen, but actually, when we are planning and organizing and teaching and educating, then that we are also working on protection for the long haul, and not just for that moment, but for longevity, for survival. As well. So when we teach, yes, preach, but also make sure that we are instilling in people that this is life-threatening work.
Wow. You know, I think it's so absolutely critical, DeMarco, and all of you have touched on this in some way. It's so absolutely critical to remember what has been called in other spaces, the sort of blue note of what it means to be on the right side of history, to stand with those who have, to use Howard Thurman's language, their backs pressed against the wall, those who are oppressed, those who have been marginalized and minoritized by the system, is to stand with those who, at least in terms of historical perspectives, do not have the best chance of winning, in the sense that the popular culture typically measures wins. One of the most tragic things I think that has happened as we transition to our last question in American popular memory, as we think about story and as we think about language, is that we don't know one of our most important figures after about 1964, 65. We know Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963, 1964, maybe 65, if we're sort of pushing to be radical. But in 1967, the year before he is assassinated, he gives an interview to NBC, Dr. King does, in which he shares that when he looks back at 1963, he sees that as a really optimistic time. And then he confesses on national television, as you can find this interview on YouTube for those of y'all who want to find it, hit me for the citation if you need it. He shares on national television, he says, "I have to confess that in many ways, the dream that I shared in 1963 has become a nightmare." Yet he was still committed to the work, right? So some of what y'all are touching on that is so very important is too many of us think that, being involved in justice and equity work is about showing up and to things that are always joyous and always fun. And one of the things that I think we ought to take from the best of our ancestors, from the best of the stories that fuel and inform us, is our folks have learned how to make beautiful music out of some of the most painful things that the human experience can give. You can hear this in our music, you can hear it in our blues, you can hear it in our jazz, you can hear it. And I think that we're going to need this creative, innovative, these ingenious ways of finding joy in moments of pain, because we are still in a moment where, despite the fact that we have a new presidential administration now, we would be remiss if we did not note that 74 million people, almost 75 million people, voted to keep the same president that we had. So some of the blues that is in our past is the blues that is in our present, and we would be remiss if we didn't keep track of that. I want to use that comment to pivot towards our next question, which is this. We have a new administration in the White House now. I'm going to come to you first, Reverend Pierce, because I think I saw that you had a response. I'm going to let you build that response into this response, if that's okay. We have a new administration in the White House, new leaders who will work to repair much of the pain and the distrust that was exacerbated during the previous administration. For many, this is an undeniable sign of hope. Yet many leaders find themselves exhausted by the emotional and psychological work that has been required to resist 4 years of historic lies, discrimination, and hatred while living through the coronavirus in the last year. In this bewildering moment, what advice do you, Reverend Pierce, have for leaders working to both care for themselves and to cultivate transformative community?
So I want to say what you said about King, in his saying that his feeling that the dream became a nightmare is very similar to what Frederick Douglass articulated in his third and even more so in his fourth autobiographies. That Frederick Douglass's first two autobiographies are written in a place of hope and optimism, that after the Civil War, that America had a chance to move in a direction to unroot the racism that had been the underpinning of the slaveocracy. But as America begins to backtrack on it, and as the Reconstruction was undone, and states were allowed to reinforce white supremacy through Jim Crow laws, Frederick Douglass becomes disenchanted, and his third and fourth autobiographies are written in this place of in this blues note. This note of being distressed about what's happening, but still refusing to give up, even in the midst of his distress.
Yes.
And so I want to say the first thing we ought to do is we ought to read history and understand that the same things that applied in history will probably apply to us. In other words, if Frederick Douglass in his work could not fix this, and Martin Luther King Jr. in his work could not fix this, then we in our work, we're probably not going to fix this. And so we need to prepare ourselves that we are not in a momentary fight where if we win a couple of strategic battles, then we can retire and applaud ourselves on a job well done. But that we will be in this struggle and in this fight probably for the rest of our lives, and we'll probably have to teach our children how to fight this fight because they will probably be engaged in this fight. And so that difference of perspective can help to mitigate against the distress of disappointment, because we are not, when we realize we're training not for a sprint, but for a marathon, you train differently, you run differently, you prepare yourself differently.
That's right.
One of the things that happened later in Dr. King's very short life was Howard Thurman wrote to him and asked him to take time away from the front lines and to come spend time with him. I believe he was in California at the time that he wrote the letter, so that King could rest, so that he could re-energize his mind, so that he could come with a new sense of creativity into the work. But King felt so compelled that he had to be on the front lines that he refused to take time away to rest. And so I want to say to everybody out here, please know that this movement is bigger than you. No matter who you are or what you are doing or how critical your role is, this movement was here before you were born, and it will continue on after you are dead and sleeping in your grave. So don't ever think that you can't take a moment to pause and catch your breath so that you can re-emerge in the struggle well and more clearly. And so
radical rest.
It's critically important for our long-term fight, because we're going to be in this for a while. This is what America is. It is a land where freedom has to be fought for and struggled for. And so we must prepare ourselves for the struggle, which means that sometimes we have to get rest. Sometimes we have to take moments for joy for ourselves.
Yes.
Sometimes we have to take moments to engage in conversations like this, to recharge, to remind ourselves that we are not alone. Sometimes we got to call up friends and family and say, I don't have it today. Can somebody step in for me and help me out until I can catch my breath and get back on my feet? That we must be in this work together in community and learn how to take the time that we need so that when we re-emerge, we can do so from a place of strength and a place of renewed creativity.
It's so essential. Reverend Pierce, thank you so much. I think we actually recently read that story about the letter exchange between Dr. Thurman and Dr. King in the class that I mentioned earlier. One of the things that I regularly point out in my ethics course when we're trying to understand whiteness, not just as a word, but really as a reality, is one of the presuppositions of whiteness is that if there's any problem that we discover in society, we have the capacity, the know-how, and the power to fix it. that assumption that the power, the authority always rests with us is an authority that folks on the margins have not had. That's not to say that folks on the margins are powerless. That's not to say that there is not power that resides there, but it is to say, to build on Reverend Price's brilliant point, that some of that power is discovered in choosing radical rest over self-defeating exhaustion.
That's right.
Right? You don't get more points for suffering, right? If we learn anything from Jesus' story, it's that the suffering will find you. You don't need to put yourself in it.
That's right.
DeMarco, I want to turn to you and give you an opportunity, and then I'm going to turn to Dr. Gould and let her have the last word as we move towards wrapping. But I want to, DeMarco, give you an opportunity to think about, in light of the new administration, as folks are trying to sort of bring themselves back to the work or keep themselves in the work in the midst of the exhaustion that seems to pervade so many of the circles that we move in. Folks are tired, are they not? What does it mean? What does it look like to take care of oneself as we stay committed to the work of transforming community?
Yeah, so well, first of all, foremost, I definitely love the concept and ideal of radical rest. That's something that I plan on doing this weekend, and making sure that this is a sacred, holy, radical rest at that. So I think that's first and foremost, and recognizing that, yes, even Jesus took naps, so it's okay. Like, get some rest, y'all. And knowing that we also don't need any more martyrs. We don't need that no more. Like, we don't need anyone else to be martyred. We have enough of those already. We need people to continue to do the work and to continue to pass the torch and make sure that others understand and know what we're dealing with. And one of the things that, again, a huge appreciation to Reverend Dr. Ben Sanders. One of my last papers my very last paper in seminary was titled "Inhaling the Smoke of White Supremacy: The Failed Integration Policies of Martin Luther King," where I focused on the fact that, one, integration was a radical policy or even a radical practice then. It wasn't for the faint of heart. Like, Black people didn't want to do it, white people didn't want to do it, but yet still, like, so that's, that was radical then.
I remember that paper, for the record.
Yes, yeah. Because he was like, man, that's a bit harsh, man. That's a bit, how you gonna say they, he was like, that's a bit harsh, but like, you told me to be provocative. But when I think of how Martin Luther King shared with Harry Belafonte, I felt like I felt like I integrated my people into a burning house. I mentioned how my father, who was a firefighter, he would tell me, like, most people die from inhaling the smoke. They don't actually die from the fires. So we do see the fires, right? To me, the fires of white supremacy, yes, that is failed coups. That is the Ku Klux Klan. That is, those things. But the smoke of white supremacy are the policies.
Yes.
The smoke of white supremacy are the practices, or the smoke of white supremacy are the budgets for schools, for education, for, like, the fact that we argue and fight and yell and scream at each other about school districts. And we have here in Missouri, we have a governor who is cutting budgets on schools for students who don't attend school in the midst of a pandemic, a global pandemic. And I think about also, I always reflect and lift up the names of Judy Wilson Griffin, as well as Jasmine Dixon, who were the first Black women to die from the complications of COVID in St. Louis City, St. Louis County. So recognizing that, again, like someone shared, these wars and these fights and these struggles and these sufferings, they're gonna come to us, whether we ready for them or not. So to me, that's also one of the things to prepare to be able to, for those who are, again, for us, I'm speaking specifically to us in this group here, who are seminarians, who've been through seminary, to make sure that our congregations, that our communities, that our immediate families can at least have these type of discussions or conversations, not using all the great theological words that we use, but to actually have conversations with them and ask them, where do you get your thinking from? Where do you get your understanding from? And I remember being in class in 2016. We had Faith and Christian Ethics the day after the election at 8:30 in the morning. And there was a huge amount of people crying. And I was like, man, what y'all crying for? Like, welcome to America. And no, y'all can't sit in the front. Y'all got to get in the back. Like, welcome. Like, I know y'all disappointed. This is frustrating. It was irritating to go from having 8 years of a Barack Obama to then that president. So what does it mean for rest, right? I really want to make sure I stay focused for rest and for recovery, as well as preparing for what to come next. I definitely encourage people again, like, and there's even something that we're doing is having these conversations, having what we call transformative conversations. But when we are having these discussions to figure out where people getting their development from, we did do Reverend Gould and several other organizations we did form transformative conversations in 2019. And we found two things. We found that people in urban areas or suburban areas don't even think about the rest of the state. But then we also learned that people's media diets, like they would get the majority of the information at one point in time from the news, from cable news, or even from the internet somewhere, with very little verification, very little information. Like they didn't have a Professor Krause to correct them in their illogical thinking. They didn't have a Professor Grundy, anybody like that, to correct them or check them on these type of things. But because they were being fed to these things, and I remember being in Rolla, Missouri, and what happened with Rolla is that Walmart came in and destabilized the economy. Long story short, Walmart came in and stabilized the economy. And so people didn't understand, and then they weren't hurting that bad. But long story short, when it came time to start raising wages, Walmart didn't want to do that. That's one of the ways we were able to actually pass. Raise minimum wage. From the conversations we had, we recognized that a lot of rural areas, hospitals were closing. That's why we were able to pass Medicaid expansion. It's because we were actually having conversations with people in different parts of Missouri. But then again, what does that mean for St. Louis, for Black people, right? Or in these other areas? So yes, it's important. It's absolutely important to get the rest, but it's also, to me, we definitely need to make sure we have conversations. Because my question to clergy is your ministry, is your sermon more powerful than social media? Yes. Is your ministry and your sermons more powerful than any news talking head? And is your ministry and your sermons open and inviting for people to be challenged, but then to say, let's talk about this. If you have some thoughts about what I'm saying, if you completely disagree, let's discuss this. And I think it goes back to that mindset at one point in time, right? That, you know, yes. Not Reverend Gould, not Pastor Nelson, and not barely anybody from Eden anymore. We no longer have that mindset that, oh, the pastor is right, you don't question God. When we start recognizing that the God is in each of us and see the God in the next generation, then we are way more comfortable and confident in, again, carrying the fight, make sure we get rest as well, yes. and passing the baton to the next generation.
Wow, that is so profound. Knowing that the work is not all ours to do, that enables us to go about the radical work of resting. I saw somewhere, by the way, the chat is just an outstanding example of the brilliance of Eden Alum. If y'all not in the chat, get in the chat. I saw somewhere, I think it was maybe Lauren Buck, who said that rest is pleasure, and one of the most radical things that we can do, particularly as folks who have been marginalized, right, is to intentionally seek and practice pleasure, to seek joy, to find the things that give us joy. Dr. Gould, I wonder if you would be willing to bring us home by sharing a little bit of your advice for folks who are trying to rest and stay committed to the work of transformation and equity in this moment.
Absolutely. When my brother, Reverend Nelson, was speaking, one of the things that I thought about was from biblically, from Hebrews 11, where it talks about all of the folk who didn't get to see the promises, right? And I think oftentimes, particularly in ministry, we act as if the promise is not going to happen if we don't bring it into fruition. So we move rapidly, we move always, we don't allow ourselves to stop. Particularly as Black people, it is in our DNA. We were conditioned to have our bodies and our minds in constant and perpetual motion. We have to find the spaces. You talked a lot about Howard Thurman, who's near and dear to many of us. Dr. King, that letter, that invitation, never left home without a Thurman book. It was his way of centering, finding a clearing. in Toni Morrison's Beloved, Sweet Baby Suggs takes folk to the clearing, a holy place that gets you away from the perpetual movement of just the busyness of our lives, that protects you from the violence of white supremacy, that takes you out of the space of urgency that is a part of the heteronormative tradition of white folk, to have you always stepping and fetching and moving and making everything seem as if it does not happen today, it might not happen. And so we have to put those things into practice. As the way that I've practiced that, and I am a person that's busy, right? But when I was in seminary, a beloved seminary peer, Shelley Haynes, who's now gone on to be with the Lord, she told me, she said, busyness is overrated. I want you to write me a wellness plan that includes a personal Sabbath for you. And I started that my second year of seminary. Thursdays was my personal Sabbath. I never took a class on Thursday. I didn't care who was teaching the class, what it was, never had a Thursday class. The way I've incorporated that, even in the work of Missouri Faith Voices, is initially Friday was my Sabbath. It is an organizational Sabbath now. And so I'm like, I better not catch you on an email. You better not be doing work. You better not even post on our organization's Facebook on a Friday, because I really want people to understand that. 2 days ago, there was a report released that indicated that because of COVID-19, Americans lost a year of life expectancy. If you read down into the report, Black folk lost 2.5 years of life expectancy. And so our lives are already traumatized. We're already at risk always of death. And so this radical notion of rest has to be something that we incorporate. Many of you know that I had a horrible car accident on July 29th. It took me 162 days to even be able to stand on both of my feet, and I'm still on a walker. I was literally living for August and November election, living for it so much that I'm Methodist, and I told the bishop, no, I'm not going to take an assignment. I'm not leaving Missouri at this time because I have work to do, and I want to make sure that we show up well for these elections. My organization had been fighting for Medicaid expansion long before my time, for the life of the organization. We're only 10 years old. And Medicaid expansion was on the ballot on August the 4th. When August the 4th came, I was in the hospital and barely knew my name because I had an accident on July 29th. In fact, on the morning of August the 4th, I had my second surgery. And so what I remember, and it was 10 o'clock at night before I woke up and realized today was election day. The election went on without me. Medicaid expansion was passed. My staff did what they needed to do. And it was a reminder from God that all things were not dependent on me. And that if I got off the earth and just stepped off the merry-go-round for a little while, that everything would keep going. And so I have been really sitting with that notion and understanding that it is not solely dependent on us. I think the church has a way, particularly for pulpit kinds of folk, has a way of reinforcing or conditioning us around self-aggrandizement, even if we don't recognize that. Many of us suffer from the Messiah complex. And so we believe, as the senior pastor especially, that it always has to be us. That is a lie that is also a product of white supremacy. And there are also the ways in which, so Dr. King gets the letter and the invitation from Howard Thurman. As a woman who is doing this work, as a woman who sat and listened to people from national news to the folk next door talking about how the church was not President Ferguson, it was because the church didn't come in three-piece suits. The church came looking like the sisters. There are always, and I'm always concerned about those who carry the weight, who don't get to be on the front line, who don't get to be on a panel, who don't get to have, you know, these elaborate verbose bios because they've been recognized and etc. The people on the second, third, fourth, and fifth line who are just as exhausted and in many cases more exhausted, and they don't have a Howard Thurman to write them a letter. They don't have anyone. So I just want to say, I see you, and wherever you are with your exhaustion, with your grief, find a clearing. Find a place that you can go. I'm in this car now and I'm apologizing for that because I'm on my way to the clearing because I understand that in this season, for me to be able to show up well for the next season, that rest has to be radical and it has to be holy. So even in a pandemic, even in a snowstorm, when I'm on a walker, I'm on my way to the clearing. And I also want to suggest a couple of books. Dr. Susan K. Smith, who we know in Love at Eden, Justice for the Rest for the Justice Weary Soul. It's an amazing devotion. I'm on my third read of it. That's how good it is. Dr. Byron Jones Kirk, or either Kirk Jones, I always mess his name up, has a book of devotions called Brew. It's an acronym, but it is a great devotion for getting you into the clearing. Read Beloved if you haven't, and even if you have, in honor of Black History Month and next month, Women's History Month, read it and figure out where your clearing can be, and go to a place that is safe and it is holy, that you can let out all of the things that you are carrying.
Wow. Dr. Gould, thank you so much for blessing us as always with your powerful wisdom and your powerful words. I want to thank you, Reverend Pierce, for blessing us with your commitment to the church, but also with your commitment to making the church what it's supposed to be. My brother DeMarco Davidson, I want to thank you for remaining on the front line, for knowing how to rest while you up there, and for also knowing when you need to step back. Friends, I don't know about you, but I heard at least 3 or 4 sermons in here. I heard at least 3 or 4 topics. DeMarco's got me wanting to talk about the morality and ethics of social media use and how that ought to be being reshaped in this moment, given what we know about social media and what it can do to us, not just what we can use it for, but what it can do to us. I am so grateful for this powerful example of what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like to be a Black alumnus of Eden Seminary. I want to remind you all of the really powerful and exciting opportunity that we have, thanks to Dr. Enoch Oglesby, that he's going to match up to $5,000 of the scholarship that exists in his name. Y'all, what we are looking at is what is possible when we invest in our work. I know that there are tons of things that you can give your time and your treasure to, but I dare invite you on this call to consider giving to the Enoch Oglesby Scholarship as an expression of your commitment to keeping this tradition alive, a tradition that can be of the church and also know that the church is not yet what it is called to be, a tradition that can be of Eden Seminary and therefore remain committed to calling St. Louis and the state of Missouri, and indeed the country and the world, to something that is more faithful to the social vision of Jesus. Y'all, I would invite y'all to remember that what we are watching right here are not just 3 articulate African-American human beings, but 3 alums of Eden Theological Seminary. This is our community. This is our work, y'all. What we are doing at Eden is we are trying to remain committed to the transformative work of anti-racist theological education that gets at racism and also addresses all of those intersecting oppressions that we know are there: the sexism, the heterosexism, the xenophobia, the environmental degradation, all of the practices that demean God's creation. We are working hard, y'all, even during COVID, to make sure that Eden Seminary remains a place that people can look in seasons of darkness. And you are still a part of that. Alums though you may be, please don't be afraid to come back. Please don't be afraid to give back. Please don't be afraid to reach back. When we reach back, we create space for those who will come after us to learn how to resist, to learn how to rest, and to learn how to keep their hands to the plow as we will do. Friends, thank you so much. I want to again thank DeMarco, thank Pastor Pierce, and thank Dr. Gould for being here for this rich conversation. I am so excited for the possibility that we might be able to do this again in the future. Y'all, thank you for signing in. This will be available later through recording. Check Eden's Facebook page and hit up the people on staff if you want to find a quick way to get that link so that you can share it with other people. And as always, y'all, until the next time I see you, please take care of yourself. Stay warm, love yourself. We are still our best gifts, and God is pleased with us as long as we continue to stand with those who have no one else to stand with them. Take care, family.